Jest mi niezwykle przyjemnie powitać wszystkich Państwa w gościnnych progach naszego konsulatu i jest mi przyjemnie w dwójnasób, że Instytut Kanadyjsko-Polski, Instytut Badawczy powraca po małej przerwie do naszego obiektu po to, żeby przedstawić następną fascynującą historię, następnego fascynującego człowieka, bo rzeczywiście gościmy dzisiaj i za to dziękuję Instytutowi. Cieszę się, że możemy świętować w ten sposób 60-lecie tej jakże zasłużonej dla Polonii kanadyjskiej instytucji i jak już zacząłem mówić, mamy dzisiaj to jedno z rocznicowych spotkań postać zupełnie niebanalną. Jak czytam poetę, pisarza, filozofa, kreatywnego myśliciela, jak udało mi się przeczytać. Jestem ciekaw, co to pojęcie znaczy. Osobę, która jest znana i szanowana w tutejszej społeczności, pana Stana Skrzeszewskiego. Słyszałem o panu Stanisławie wiele dobrych rzeczy. Cieszę się niezmiernie, że dzisiaj wieczór będę mógł potwierdzić te wszystkie dobre opinie w praktyce. Co do tego nie mam wątpliwości, a do tego mamy historię tak samo niebanalną jak prelegenta. Rzecz, o której tutaj przyznam się, nie wiem, czy powinienem się wstydzić, czy nie, ale rzecz, o której nie słyszałem, dopóki nie przeczytałem zaproszenia na tę uroczystość. Sądziłem, że oprócz znanych kilku nazwisk Polacy w Kanadzie, a już w jej środkowej części pojawili się dużo później. Myślę, że ta moja wypowiedź już jest za długa, więc nie będę jej przedłużał, tylko zgodnie z życzeniem pani prezes zapraszam od razu do mikrofonu i do przemowy pana Stana Skrzeszewskiego. Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję panu konsulowi. Nie wiem, kto tu mówi po polsku, po angielsku, ale zdecydowaliśmy, ostatnim razem to robiliśmy, co było rok temu, to było wszystko po polsku. Także mogę przemienić, bo mam PowerPoint też w języku polskim, ale ten jest w angielskim. So, like it or not, most of this is going to be in English. I'm curious, is there anybody, because I was always hoping we'd actually get some Canadians come and listen in. Is there anybody here who actually doesn't speak Polish? Jest taki, który nie mówi w ogóle po polsku? To znaczy powinien mówić po polsku. Well, zobaczymy.
Is there anyone who doesn't speak English?
Okay, wszystko będzie po francusku. Okay. No, and I am going to do most of this in English. I might switch to Polish. The main reason for doing it in English is that one of the premises I start from is that we speak very well amongst ourselves. We don't speak very well out to the outside audience. In other words, to the general Canadian audience. So in a way, even if everybody sitting here is in a sense Polish or Polish-Canadian, I hope you're listening to this as kind of with a Canadian ear, because this is who it's intended for. We want the Canadians to know about our history. By that I mean Polish-Canadian history or Polish history in general, and to know something about our culture, most Canadians know very little. And over time, we've really suffered from kind of negative publicity. It's pretty obvious if you talk to the average Canadian, their impression of Polish people, Poland, well, to be polite, could be better. So we've got to do a better job of public relations in terms of what we speak to the Canadian public about and how we do it and how we present ourselves. So this is part of an initiative along that way of thinking. And yes, I'm very pleased to be here. As you can see, well, we all know it's Canada's 150th, so it's a good thing to celebrate. And as Polish Canadians, we have every right to be here and celebrate because we've been here for the 150 years. And it's part of our history as people of Polish descent living in Canada. And of course, I'm also very pleased that we have the 60th anniversary of the Canadian Polish Research Institute. And the fact that we're doing it in the Polish consulate in Toronto just makes it seem like the perfect venue for something to discuss Polish-Canadian historical relations that cover the last not only 150 years, but actually go back to more than 200 years. No, I have to be able to multitask, which means hitting that button. Okay. War of 1812. It's basically a war between the Americans and the British. A few years ago, we celebrated the 200th anniversary of the War of 1812. And it was important to Canada because, in a sense, it was Canada's war of independence. If Canada lost this war, there wouldn't have been a Canada. So in some sense, Canadians came together, maybe not as Canadians per se, but as a group of people who lived here and declared themselves independent from the United States. And it was the first time, I think, Canadians, at least some Canadians, began to see themselves as Canadians and not just as colonials. Now, the war was declared by the United States against Great Britain, primarily because Britain was stopping American ships and impressing some sailors on those ships to serve in the British Navy. Needless to say, the Americans didn't like people boarding their ships and taking sailors off to serve in the British Navy because they were at war at the same time. The Americans also were under the expectation that if they marched north, that there was not going to be any battle at all. It wasn't going to be a war. That if the Americans zaczęli maszerować na północ, to Kanadyjczycy się od razu by dołączyli do Stanów i byłoby koniec Kanady, była jedna wielka zjednoczenie amerykańskie po całej północnej Ameryce. Tak się nie stało, because the Canadians resisted. Yes, poles and redcoats. That's why I'm wearing, this is a pole and a red coat. There's another pole and a red coat over there. The British Army, which we see here, along with Canadian militia and Indian allies, had the task of defending Canada. What is largely unknown, and this fun consul doesn't have to feel at all embarrassed, almost nobody knows that there were Polish soldiers involved with the British Army in defending Canada. It's an unknown fact. Even historians, Canadian historians, would know very little about it, never mind the average person who would definitely not know anything about it. You get surprised sometimes that a few people do know, but by and large it's an unknown fact. When we were celebrating the War of 1812, I'm a natural historian, Canadian and Polish. I'm just interested in the subject, so I pursue it. So when it was the anniversary of the War of 1812 and living in Niagara, I thought to myself, this is interesting, I'm going to learn more about the War of 1812. And so I started to look for, were there other nationalities involved? And the first clue I had was by reading Pierre Berton's book on the War of 1812. Pierre Berton is a famous Canadian historian who's written about most things of importance to Canada. On one page, in a little note, he refers to some foreign corps. That's the only reference in a 2-volume set of the War of 1812 by one of Canada's predominant historical writers. And in those 2 or 3 lines he describes, he says, yes, there were foreign regiments, and those foreign regiments he basically described as a motley foreign corps. Basically, they were not much use, they didn't do any good. Well, when I read that, and I knew there were some Poles involved, I turned red, literally. No, knowing my father as a Polish veteran, if there's an insult to a Polish veteran or Polish soldier or suggestion that a Polish soldier is not able to fight or wouldn't fight under any circumstances, that gets my back up. I immediately think, well, they obviously don't know anything about Polish soldiers, because the Polish veterans I've met fought under incredibly difficult conditions for a lost cause in many ways, and did it with honor, duty, Bóg honor ojczyzna. So for somebody like Pierre Berton to define these people as motley foreign corps certainly got me annoyed. And this is typical of history. Poles and other minority groups, it wasn't just the Poles that were ignored. We all know the black people who fought in that war were ignored. Until very recently, the Indian people were ignored. And the fact of the matter is there were all kinds of nationalities involved, not just Polish. There were, you name it, from Europe, they were there somewhere fighting. So this is what I'm trying to do, is correct history. Now the fun thing is, people say writing revisionist history is bad. I'm proudly writing revisionist history. It's revisionist because it's bringing in people like Poles and announcing that they had a role to play. And that's revising the standard approach to this history. And my project is also another premise, which has always worked out when I'm doing historical research, that after the elimination of Poland from the map of Europe in 1795, and then we see the partitions, rozbiory, you could assume that any war that happened after that, after those partitions, after the rozbiory, that there were some Polish soldiers involved in every major battle that took place on the planet from that day on. And I applied that premise to the War of 1812. I said, okay, this was after the partitions. There had to be some Poles. I just have to find them. I know they're there. That was a given. And sure enough, when I started to look, there they were. I found quite a few. How did this come about? Well, after the fall of the Kościuszko uprising in 1794, many Polish patriots set forth under the slogan, "For our freedom and yours," and they went off to France and Italy. And it's been that way. You've got to think of it this way, that since the Napoleonic Wars, since the time of Napoleon and the end of Napoleon, Polish soldiers have been going forth almost for 200 years now to fight for our freedom and yours. The motivation of the soldiers that were in the British Army in the War of 1812 is no different than the motivation of the Polish soldiers who fought at Monte Cassino or Falaise or any other famous Polish battle you want to mention. They weren't there to really fight for the cause or the place they were actually at that moment. It didn't really matter to Poles whether they captured Monte Cassino. What mattered is that they were heading towards Poland. And the poor guys at Fort Erie or Oswego or Toronto fighting in the War of 1812 had exactly the same thought. They wanted to get back to an independent Poland. So that's been happening the whole time. And obviously, whether you were fighting at Fort Erie in 1814 or at Monte Cassino in 1944, I think the motivation, the basic principles that guided those soldiers were probably the same. Those kind of szlachetne cnoty Polaków, polskiego wojska były takie same w tamtych latach, jak w naszych czasach. Polskie legiony. Polish patriots gathered in Western Europe, mainly in Italy and France, where Polish legions were being formed under people like Dąbrowski, and they were prepared to fight under Napoleon against the various armies of the anti-French coalition. Some of these Polish soldiers, and pictures of them there, were taken prisoner by the British in Italy and Spain and placed in British prisons between the years from 1808 to 1812. And then we find a few ironic things. Mówiłam, że wódka może by była lepsza. This is the Battle of Maida. It took place in Calabria. And from a Polish perspective, it's rather ironic. In the Battle of Maida, which took place in July 1806, the British forces were fighting French forces outside the town of Maida in Calabria. The French forces included 2 Polish battalions. The British forces included the Swiss battalion de Watteau, which forms a large part of our story. The British defeated the French at this battle and took some Polish soldiers as prisoners. So here's what you got to think of. At the Battle of Maida, the de Watteau regiment, under the British, fought against Polish legions, took some prisoners. Later on, these prisoners were asked to serve in the de Watteau regiment. So the regiment that defeated them at Maida was the same regiment that they ended up serving in a few years later. That strikes me as ironic and also shows you how complex some of this can be. It refers a little bit to the World War II, too, I think. If you think of when General Anders was asked, where are you going to get reinforcements when he was in Italy and in France, his answer was, I'm going to get them, they're in front of me, they're not behind me. My reinforcements are in the German army, because so many Polish soldiers were in fact having to fight in the German army. Once they had the opportunity, they crossed over. In some ways, this is somewhat similar. Another little thing is that the Battle of Maida, the de Watteau regiment, was under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Sir James Kempt. And Kempt later became the Governor General of Canada. So the guy who was in charge at Maida then went on to be in charge of Canada. Again, these little ironies of people switching roles I find quite interesting. Now comes the fun part. What happened to the Polish soldiers when they were captive? They were put in prison ships. This is just a picture. They basically old ships lying offshore. The prisoners were jammed in there. Very little light or windows or anything like that. The ships were rotten, so you can imagine the conditions. I don't even want to think of the sanitation. Well, there wasn't any. But so being put, in fact, they said in those ships, you couldn't light a candle because there wasn't enough oxygen. So that gives you an idea. So the chances of surviving on this kind of a ship as a Polish prisoner of war or any other prisoner of war were pretty bad. And if you did survive, you were going to be sick, ill. It was a very bad situation. The British gave the Poles an option. Mieli wybór. Mogli wybrać zostać na statku jako więźniowie, albo mogli wybrać wybór dołączyć do brytyjskich oddziałów. Każdy rozsądny człowiek by zdecydował, siedzieć tu dłużej nie ma sensu, jak dołączę do brytyjskiej armii, to mam chociaż jakieś nadzieje, że jakoś to przetrwam. So most of the Poles picked the lesser of two evils and joined the British regiments. And they had to swear allegiance to the Queen or the King at the time and became part of the British Army. That's what the watchful regiments look like. So most of the prisoners, the Polish prisoners, ended up in the British watchful regiment, that one that I mentioned at Maida. It's usually called the Swiss regiment because, in fact, all the officers were Swiss. And it was commanded, the language of command was French, in fact. Now, you can search records in trying to find any officers of Polish descent in the watchful regiment. You won't find them because there weren't any. Now, that's not because they were not capable, but part of the agreement was that if they were taken out of prison, because they really were loyal to Napoleon, one of the understandings was that they could not become officers because they came from the other side. So even if this Polish soldier did his duty, did all the right things, he had no chance of getting promoted to being an officer. Also, all the records of the time are, of course, about the officers. So there's very few records about the average soldier, and most of them that were there were, in fact, the Polish soldiers were there. Is that my wife? No. Okay. Would have been, so there's very little written from their perspective because they were not of the officers' corps, for one thing. This gives you an idea about the War of 1812 in our area, shows you where the watchful regiment would have ended up. It set sail from Cadiz in Spain in May 1813 and arrived in Montreal in June. There were approximately 500 soldiers serving, Polish soldiers serving in the watchful regiment. Not all of those 500 Poles made it to Canada, but a significant number did. And interesting enough, the watchful regiment was the single largest British unit within the whole British Army. It was their largest fighting force within all the units in Canada at that time, with 1,000 men. And you can see some of the major battles. They were here in Toronto at the Battle of York. They spent time in Kingston. They attacked Oswego, which isn't on that map, it's on the New York side, but they also took part in the battle at Fort Erie and basically traveled that whole route. That's what Kingston looked like in 1813, about the right time. In July 1813, 10 companies of the watchful regiment were stationed in Kingston. Upon arrival, some of the Polish soldiers deserted almost immediately and crossed to the American side. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise. Their loyalties were still with the French, who were allied to the Americans, and they were all against the British. So I think any Polish soldier that had any opportunity was busy trying to get away from their own side. Thanks to the fact that they deserted, we actually know some of the names of the soldiers, because we have better records of those that deserted and therefore were executed and things like that, than for the poor guys that just stayed and fought. So, for example, we know that Józef Fiałkowski deserted and later settled in Pennsylvania, while poor Private Danielkiewicz was shot for desertion. I think the nastiest penalty they got, some of them that deserted, were then sentenced to be in the British Army for the rest of their lives, which I would have thought, oh, all I want to do is get out of here, and they're making me serve forever. but that was one of the punishments. Now, before we pick on Poles, you've got to remember that desertion was very common with all units because, well, conditions were terrible, pay wasn't guaranteed, so every regiment suffered from desertion on both sides. Sometimes they couldn't hold a battle because they had so many desertions, there just weren't enough men left. So we can't say Poles were the biggest deserters, they all ran away. No, a significant number did, but it was common throughout all the regiments, doesn't matter what nationality, what side they were on, this happened everywhere. Now we're coming to my favorite part of the story. If I can find Prescott. That's a Prescott, I hope. Yes. 2 companies from the Duatful Regiment were stationed in Fort Wellington, which is today's Prescott. If you go to Prescott now, there's a small fort on the edge of town, and there were several Duatful regiments based there. And doing this research, I went to that fort and asked them if they had anything about the Duatful Regiment on display or anything else. They said they had 2 things that linked to the Duatful Regiment, actual artifacts. I think I can show you one of them. Mieli guzik. And I like using that one because po polsku mówię, co tam było? Guzik. Co dostałeś? Nic nie było, tylko guzik. I to jest właśnie co tam było. Guzik. Ale wykopali takiego guzika, widać, to jest jak ma wyglądać, to jest jak tamten wyglądał, zardzewiały, nie wiem czytać co tam jest. Ale dziwna rzecz, jak ja zobaczyłem tego guzika, bo oni mi pokazali w tym muzeum, no mówię, nigdy nikt nie był taki zaskoczony i zadowolony, że znalazł tego guzika. Bo ja im wytłumaczyłem, że ja już szukam miesiące już tego, coś na temat tych żołnierzy, żeby coś zostawili, że coś po nich jest i jest guzik. Ale dla mnie to była wielka przyjemność, oni się dziwili, Czesi się zwariowali na temat tego guzika. Ale dla mnie to była wielka przyjemność, bo ja tam stałem przed tym guzikiem dosyć długo i z wielkim zadowoleniem. Druga historia, the second part of the story, next to this guzik, they found a kind of an engagement ring. The story goes, nobody knows for sure, but because the ring and the guzik were right side by side in the same location, they assume it was some Polish soldier. I'm assuming it's some Polish soldier, but I'm writing this history, can I write whatever I want? And that they had a romance, and that the romance fell through. So the soldier in despair just threw away the ring. A może ona wyrzuciła i pierścionek i guzik, ja nie. Just so you don't feel too bad for these Polish soldiers and all the other soldiers in Fort Wellington, the thing that you'll never find in a history book is that just north of Fort Wellington is the Rideau River. On this river, apparently there was a boat that sailed up and down the river. It had on it what the people in the museum described to me as painted ladies. Jak się mówi po polsku painted ladies? Malowanie konia to jest co innego, a panie?
Malowane lale.
Malowane lale? Okej. To wszyscy wiedzą o co chodzi, tak? I ta łódka płynęła tam i z powrotem, no i spotykała żołnierzy i załatwiła z nimi sprawy. As I wrote in English, all the needs of the soldiers were looked after.
Robił generał Hooker.
Ja, ten właśnie, tak, on tam był też, tak. Pierwsza okazja, gdzie oni mieli właśnie do walki, to był atak na miasto Oswego. Oswego is on the New York side, it's in New York State. If you go to Oswego today, there's quite a powerful stone fort there. And on May 5th, 1814, soldiers from the Duatful Regiment took part in a British attack on the American fort at Oswego. They came by ships, so you can see the British ships coming on the hillside of the American fort, and there was a battle there. 17 soldiers from the Duatful Regiment were killed during this battle. Now, going back to Pierre Burton, who said these soldiers were worthless, our motley crew, not the rock group, here's a quote from one of the officers after this battle. This is his words. He was an officer with the Duatful Regiment. And he wrote, or it's His name is Lieutenant Joseph Mermet, or Mermet, who took part in the battle, and wrote of the party after the battle as follows. In other words, they won the battle, they were happy, they had a celebration, they drank. I shortened this way down, but here's what he said. Imagine 42 officers in a cabin, seated at their ease, babbling a Franco-Anglo-Italian patois, and how they talked, and how they listened, and how they sang, and how they drank. What harmony, what coolness, what a success. And then Lieutenant Mermet proposed a toast. Gentlemen, a toast. Colonel Fisher and the Delattre Regiment are a success. So for people like Burton, who said there was a useless regiment, reading this quote where the officer said we had a success, we toast the bravery of our men, to me, in some ways, redeems those Polish soldiers, as I knew they would be redeemed, even though this was not their war. You can imagine the poor Polish soldiers showing up in Oswego, New York, wondering, what the heck am I doing here? Co ja tu robię? Po co tu jest? Mam tych atakować, ale muszę. Now, on another interesting side story, well, that's more of the Battle of Oswego, we have to look at this redcoat. His name is General Francis de Rottenberg, Major General Francis de Rottenberg. Now, de Rottenberg was born in Gdańsk of a Swiss family, to znaczy urodził się w Gdańsku, ale ze szwajcarskiej rodziny. Brał udział w powstaniu kościuszkowskim przeciwko Rosjanom. And in that battle, he commanded an infantry regiment, to znaczy, że walczył dla Polski. In 1794, he was wounded in a battle against the Russians in the defense of Praga on the outskirts of Warsaw. So in my opinion, this man is a deserving Polish hero, even though he's of Swiss descent. But after the fall of the Kościuszko uprising, he was sent to North America before the beginning of the War of 1812. And in 1808, he was promoted to brigadier general, and in 1810, he was placed in command of the garrison in Quebec. In other words, he was the head officer for British forces in Quebec. In 1813, he was appointed as the military administrator for Upper Canada, or today's Ontario. In other words, de Rottenberg took on the role that the very famous General Brock had. In other words, after General Brock died, General Rottenberg had the same position as Brock did. And here's another thing you don't read in most of the history books, the female side of the story. Never been able to find a picture of this lady, but he was married to Julia Wilhelmina Carolina von Orelo, and who at 22 was the recognized belle in Montreal. She was the reigning beautiful woman at the dances in Montreal in 1812 and that time. Several of the generals, and I've seen these letters, writing to one another, were totally taken by this lady. And one of them, you may have heard the name. I think there's, you know Toronto better than I do, but there's a major street called Strawn. Strawn, is it Strawn? Okay, well that's named after Bishop Strawn. There's also a school, I think, named Bishop Strawn School. The important thing to note is that one of the people who wrote a love letter to our dear Julia Wilhelmina Carolina was the same Bishop Strawn. And I've seen the letter, and I mean, for the times, it's quite romantic. I wouldn't say it's certainly not vile, because nobody wrote vile letters, and it's very romantic. But even the staunchest, and he was the leader of the Anglican Church in Ontario, wrote a letter to her, wishing her well as she left Canada. And in this letter, he admires her beauty. And I mean, I would say for an Anglican clergyman, might have crossed over that line between, okay, this is a business letter, or you're getting a little fresh here. You know, but she was apparently the most beautiful woman at the time, and she was married to our guy from Gdańsk. Now, we all know about General Brock. If you look very hard, you'll find this stone. That stone is about this high off the ground, so it's not a monster stone. I guess you can tell by the grass around it. What it says on it, you can hardly see it, but it says the headquarters of de Rottenberg 1812. It marks the place where de Rottenberg had his headquarters at that time. It's located in the small town of St. David's, which is near Queenston Heights, right beside a Presbyterian church. If you find the Presbyterian church, you'll find the little stone to General de Rottenberg. And it's the only marker in southern Ontario that I'm aware of recognizing de Rottenberg's contribution to the War of 1812. Now, I point that out because I just use it for comparative purposes. General Brock, who did exactly the same job, except that Rottenberg went home healthy, he didn't get killed. General Brock got killed, he got the better monument. And I'm not saying because this guy was from Gdańsk, although that may have had something to do with it. Like I said, throughout history of Canada, we don't get first billing usually. Guy from the Guernsey Islands, British, he gets first billing. He gets the big monument.
That's why you only find the Gujik.
I know Gujik. No, I think they found all the Gujiks. Yeah, if you find the Gujik and that's the best thing you can find, you know the guy's not exactly been given the respect he deserves. Anyway. This is a map of Fort Erie at the time. You can see where the fort was, that sort of funny little shape there. But I want you to pay attention to that little round patch over on the left side. And then there's a wall in between. So when we're talking about the Battle of Fort Erie, the British were attacking that fort. Fort Erie itself is there, but they had a whole defensive wall running from Fort Erie to Snake Hill, which is that little place there. So the actual defending area was quite large, not just the fort. If you've been to Fort George, it's a much bigger area. Okay. Where am I? Here we are. So Battle of Fort Erie, that took place in August 1814. And in July, the forces of General Gordon Drummond, who was in charge at the time, were reinforced with over 1,000 soldiers of the De Watteville Regiment. In the coming assault, the British were planning an assault on this fort. The De Watteville Regiment was given the task of going along those trees, you can see the row of trees, and then cutting out and attacking Snake Hill. There were other units given other jobs, but that was their job, to hit that Snake Hill right there. That hill was defended with cannon and soldiers. The idea was it was going to be a night attack, so they were going to sneak up through the forest. So in order that nobody made any mistakes or just set off a rifle by mistake, they took the flints out of the rifle. So a rifle without a flint would be about as useful as this one. You can do whatever you want with this one. Nothing's going to happen. If you put a little flint in there, it creates a spark, then you've got the possibility, like I put powder in too. But no flint, you can't shoot it. So the flints were taken out so that nobody accidentally discharged the rifle. Okay. Now let's see what it actually looked like. This gives you some idea of what the Battle of Fort Erie with the Americans on top, the British with the Watteville Regiment trying to scale it. But the problem is there was no surprise. The Americans knew they were coming. They had cannons, they had 6 cannons above there and 4 regiments of musketeers, people with muskets. The other thing that didn't quite work, you can see there's a wall. They gave them ladders so that when they got there, they could scale the wall. The problem was the ladders were too short. So the De Watteville's, all of them, including the Poles, couldn't shoot back because they didn't have flints. Their ladders were too short, so they couldn't really get up there. So to put it mildly, the whole attack was a disaster and a massacre. The Americans were shooting from on top. They said they got so tired of just shooting because that's all they had to do. Now, there's several interpretations of this battle. You can imagine that some of the British generals blamed the foreigners for being lousy in terms of poor soldiers. On the other hand, some experts say that the Watteville's attacked 5 times. So if a regiment, under those conditions, attacks 5 times, to say that they were a poor regiment under impossible conditions, it just doesn't ring true to me. In fact, 5 times attacking in an impossible situation sounds just like a Polish soldier to me. But we never expect to win. And so again, I think this shows that the Polish soldiers and the Dowatful Regiment did the utmost possible under the circumstances to achieve their objective in this particular case. They did, but there were lots of other things that went wrong with it. I like this guy. One of the other things that happened is that on that fort, some of them tried to go around the back of it. And the back of it is the Niagara River, Lake Erie. So some of them did get around. But again, they were shot in the water and basically floated on down the Niagara River. This is well, that's a picture of a reenactment. That is the actual Dowatful Regiment uniform that you'll see in Fort Erie. The young guy is a reenactor, a student that works there for the summer. And I met him one day, and I thought, okay, I've been hearing all about how lousy this Dowatful Regiment was, and they didn't attack, and they didn't do a good job. So when I saw him there, I asked him to put the jacket on so I could get a picture. And he doesn't know who I am. And I asked him, I said, I hear the Dowatfils were a bunch of cowards. They ran away. They didn't fight. And I'm pretty sure he's not Polish, but he said no in a categorical way. He said, we attacked 5 times before we retreated. And so I had to take his picture, and I've always been very proud of his response, because that's basically what the reenactors are taught at Fort Erie, that no, they didn't just slink off into the woods. They attacked under impossible odds 5 times, which I think is any kind of recognition of courage is deserved under those circumstances. Most of the soldiers that died there, except those that floated down the Niagara River, were put in mass graves. One of the mass graves is under that monument, which is the Pro Patria monument. It's there now. That's just a monument showing Fort Erie. But I'm pretty sure that if you looked around there somewhere, you would find Polish bones. Where they are, it's hard to say. But mass graves, maybe over where Snake Hill was, there definitely are buried Polish soldiers. That's what Snake Hill looks like today. Just a little bit down from where Fort Erie is. They leveled the hill to build the houses. There are no monuments, markers, nothing. It's just, you have to ask to find out where it is. But this is where the Polish soldiers, and the others, it wasn't just Poles, the British, the Dowatful Regiment, other regiments, attacked the cannon that were on that hill right beside Lake Erie. Now in Toronto, there is a monument to the War of 1812 in Victoria Square. That's it. The list of regiments includes the Dowatful Regiment. It also talks about the Indian fighters and the black fighters. This monument was designed by the same people who designed the Vimy Ridge Monument, the Canadian Vimy Ridge. The fellow's name was Walter Seymour Allward. The problem with this monument, it was never finished. You can see half a soldier there on top. The idea was to have a full soldier, but they ran out of money, so in fact you only have a soldier from the waist down. So it doesn't look as grand as some monuments look, and it looks like, okay, we ran out of money, we're just going to stick up half the guy up there.
Good that they started from the head.
That would have been much more interesting. It's more obvious. I just feel sorry for this poor guy when I gotta take a picture of him. There's the formal dress of the Dowatful soldiers. Now the reality is that's what they look like in pictures. In day-to-day life, it didn't look at all like that. 2 quotes from the time that people were inspecting the regiment. One said, most of the regiment is almost naked. And another quote from another report says, the regiment is in rags and shoeless. So most of the time they did not look like that. Conditions were bad. They had one uniform. They had to wear it forever. And under those conditions, it wore out. You go to Fort George, this uniform is hanging in Fort George. That is a real Dowatful uniform worn by one of the Swiss officers. They said the soldiers were often hungry, but the men of the Dowatful Regiment actually may have eaten better than most. And William Dunlop, who was nicknamed Tiger Dunlop, he was a doctor in the British Army at the time. And he wrote about the Dowatful Regiment as follows. Dowatful's regiment greatly excelled in gastronomic lore. These, being practical botanists, sent out one soldier from each mess, who gathered a haversack full of wild pot herbs, with which and a little flour their ration was converted into a capital kettle of soup. In other words, most of the soldiers in the Watford Regiment knew about herbs and things you could pick in the woods, mushrooms and so on, and would go and collect them and turn what might have been a really bad meal into something much better. And I gotta think it's because polscy żołnierze prawdopodobnie znali wszystkie grzyby, jakie tam były, i inne rośliny, które można było dodać do zupy. Także wszyscy mówili, że oni mieli najlepszą zupę, bo mogli coś tam dodać. Druga rzecz, co oni robili lepiej niż kto inny, and this is from Tiger Dunlop as well, and he wrote in his book, they took down hemlock boughs and cutting off the tails of them made thatched wigwams perfectly weatherproof. So, tak wygląda, że żołnierze polscy robili lepsze wigwamy niż ci inni żołnierze. Także mieli trochę lepsze szałasy i trochę lepiej jedli niż większość, bo się znali trochę lepiej na takich rzeczach. Okay. Wojna się skończyła. Members of the Delightful Regiment show up again in Thunder Bay. And I think somebody was saying they're going to Thunder Bay. Yes. So we find the Delightfuls again coming into Thunder Bay to Fort William there. And that's a picture of the reenactors. Now the Delightfuls are called the Demurons, but it's basically the same men. And when they have reenactments at Fort William, it's these guys. It's the same people that fought at Fort Erie and so on. The reason they're called the Murons is that there were two Swiss regiments. They were both disbanded at the end of the war. One was the De Watteville and the other was the Muron. Lord Selkirk at that time was planning an expedition to Manitoba to create basically Winnipeg and the Red River colony. And he needed men to protect his colonists going out there. So he went to these two regiments and asked for volunteers. Would you volunteer to act as an armed guard taking the settlers out to Red River and protecting them there? Some of the men that volunteered were in fact Polish, so some of them made their way out to Fort William and then went out to Thunder Bay, past Thunder Bay, and then on to the Red River. And we were just talking about this. There is a monument to Polish pioneers. It's in Birds Hill Park, and it's got, I think, what is it, number 10 names on it?
Yes.
And those are the original, some of the original Polish soldiers that went out there in about 1817 to help settle the Red River colony. There may have been as many as 14. There may have been, if you included spouses, if there were some, there were 21. It's hard to get an exact number because the records are not very clear. I've looked at some of them, they're very confusing. But this is a monument to them. The other thing I discovered, there were papers in the Fort William site, and in there you can look at a contract that some of the Polish soldiers signed with Lord Selkirk saying, yes, we will go out to Fort William and we will abide by these rules. Four of the people that signed were Laurent, and these, you got to know that these names are all misspelled. So they don't look Polish, they don't look English, they're kind of a composite. So you have to guess. Laurent Wilecki, Martin Kraliuk, Michał Isak, Jean Wasilewski. Now I saw the actual document where these four guys signed the contracts. The interesting thing is they're all signed with an X. So there's a good chance that many of these Polish soldiers, which would have been common at the time, could neither read nor write. So when they came to writing down their names, the French officers would write down their name. So you have to imagine, here's me, full Polish soldier, prisoner of war. Here's this nasty Frenchman or Swiss guy. I come up and he says to me in French, what's your name? And I say, Stanisław Skrzeszewski. And he's got to write this down. He doesn't know any Polish. So he writes down Stanisław Skrzeszewski as best he can make it out. And if you study it, you can sort of see, okay, I think that could be Stanisław Skrzeszewski, but some of those names are so screwed around. It's very difficult. And of course they're repeated, and each time they're repeated, they're spelled differently. So it's a challenge. What saves us in the records, which almost made me cry when I found them, they're in Ottawa, whole list of all the regiments, and they've got all these names all screwed up. And I'm thinking, oh, how am I going to know that whatever this name is that's totally screwed around up, is Polish. Behind every one, they have written "ne" and "Polon," which means born in Poland. That is totally clear. So no matter how screwed up the name is, you might never figure out what this poor guy's real name was. But when you read that, born in Poland, you think, okay, this poor guy, name's all messed up, but he was one of the Polish soldiers. And that is very easy to interpret. Okay, moving on. Where are we? Now, the question is, did they stay in Winnipeg? Did they move on? It's hard to tell. The names disappear over time. The records are not there. If you go to, whoops, there, another chart, yeah. If you go there now, if you go to St. Boniface, Manitoba, and you look around, you will find one thing that tells you that the Demurons were there. There's a street named Rue de Muron. As far as I know, that's the only symbol of the Demurons that still stands in St. Boniface, Manitoba. But at least we've got that much. Now, here comes another puzzle. I ask people to say, z których stron myślicie, że te kurtki są w Polsce? Czy ktoś poznaje, jakie to są możliwe, z których stron polskie kurtki? Age. That's the right answer. Jak ja zacząłem oglądać, to wiem, że jedno drugie nie są zupełnie podobne, ale to, że są czerwone kurtki i że są zaszywane kwiatki i tym podobne. I wiadomo jest, że Indianie dostali te wzory, nie sami wymyślili, dostali od Europejczyków. Także możliwe jest, że jeden z tych Polaków, który tam siedział w Winnipeg, miał przy sobie taką kurtkę, Indianom się podobało, zaczęli sobie robić samemu. Bo te wzory nie są wcześniejsze niż zanim Europejczycy przyszli. So I started to check to see could there be any Polish Métis, and I'm sure there were some. If you look, you'll find that there's a lot of early Métis who have the first name Stanisław. Now, a lot of French people have the name Stanisław too. But when you think that at least one of these Stanisłavs lived in the village of Posen in Manitoba, Posen being the German name for Poznań, I'm beginning to think, okay, there's a possibility that this Stanisław, the Métis from Poznań, was in fact Polish. But when you look further, I did find one for sure. John Wasilewski, again, name really misspelt, who was a Demuron, married Justine Fournier, and they are listed in the records of abstracts of half-breed affidavits, which is the Métis list. This Wasilewski is in fact Jan Wasilewski, who was born in Tuchin, Poland, joined the Dowatwo Regiment in 1811, and married a Métis woman in Winnipeg. Did they have children? I do not know. I know I read a contemporary Polish description of going out to Manitoba and looking at some of the native women and their eating habits. And it's when you kill a buffalo or anything, the best treat is things like the raw heart, the raw kidney. So a good wife, a good Métis wife, would, while they were butchering the bison, cut it open. It was still warm, that was best. Pull out the liver or the kidney or whatever it was, the raw organ. And because the husband was boss at that time, you would gracefully give the bloody, warm kidney, liver to the husband, and at the same time, the wife would busily chomp away on this, of course, would be blood everywhere. So for European sensibilities, I don't know. Could you get romantically attached to somebody eating a raw liver? Maybe. I would have problems. How do you like this? Oh, thanks, dear. Yeah, this is wonderful. No, you don't even cook them, eh? Okay. But, on the other hand, certain priorities take over. So, this is a bit of a leap, granted, but that there are similarities in design and that they are European-based suggests that there was some influence on native art from Europe. And some of them definitely did marry some of these Polish soldiers. What we don't know is about descendants and that kind of thing. A few bits to add to the end of this story. Winter of 1825 in Manitoba was a very bad one. Many of the settlers were dying from the cold. And the early spring of 1826, sounds familiar like this year, the rivers flooded, and many of the settlers became disgusted with Red River and decided to go south to Fort Snelling, which is now in St. Paul, Minnesota. An emigrating party of 243 made the on-foot with carts journey down the Red River to Fort Snelling. And there definitely were Poles in this group as well. Now, guess who the most prominent Pole was in this group? If you said Jan Wasilewski, you would be right. It was the same guy that married the native woman. The only trouble now is he's got himself a Swiss bride. So our Jan Wasilewski was a busy guy, what can I say? He seemed to have had a Métis wife, he seemed to have had a Swiss wife, he was in Manitoba, then he went off to Fort Snelling. Fort Snelling, by the way, was named for an American general, Colonel Snelling, the commanding officer of the fort, and he gave permission to these New Hurons coming from Red River to stay at the fort. The irony of this is that General Snelling was one of the American generals at the Battle of Fort Erie, fighting from the other side. So another one of those little things. We're almost there. The final irony, and maybe the biggest irony of all, is that in 1917, let me see if I can catch up. There we have Fort Snelling. That's where I want to be. That probably everybody knows is the camp at Niagara on the Lake that was put up in 1917, 1918, the Polish Army camp. That's just a panorama shot of the Polish soldiers that were there. It was called Camp Kościuszko. And over 22,000 men were trained at that camp. At least 21,000 of them were sent to France and served as part of the Holler's Army, Polish Blue Army, and fought for an independent Polish state. So in a sense, these guys were fighting for the same thing that the soldiers of 1812 were fighting for, which is an independent Polish state. It just took a lot longer than expected to achieve it. But the amazing thing is that these guys here that are camped next to Fort George, and you've got to remember when these people were camped, there was no Fort George. Has anybody been to Fort George? You got to imagine at this time there was no Fort George. There was no few buildings, but there was no palisade. None of that existed. This is Fort George. In 1817, the Polish Dłatwo Regiment camped in exactly the same spot, only 100 years earlier. So I keep wondering, I wondered if those poor guys that were camped out there had any idea that 100 years earlier, a Polish army essentially camped in the same spot, and whether they made any connections to that history, whether they're even aware of it. Good possibility nobody knew anything about it. But they were literally camped on the same fields 100 years later. So history repeats itself. But it also shows you how significant Poles are to Canadian history. We were sitting on that field in 1814. We were sitting on that field in 1917. And now we go there every year in June and have a building. So it's substantial what the Polish contribution is, but only we seem to know about it, and not all of us do. So, I'm getting to my conclusion. When I started this, the primary objective really was to make sure that the Polish soldiers who fought in the War of 1812 were not forgotten. And this repeats itself throughout Polish history. Zawsze są żołnierze zapomnieni i zawsze trzeba coś zrobić, żeby upewnić, żeby nie byli zapomnieni. So that's what I was trying to do, was to create some kind of record of the Polish soldiers of 1812 to make sure that they were not forgotten, or that they were even dragged back into memory. And this, we now have 3 volumes of books that I was able to churn out that have to do with these soldiers. And neither of them are here, but I want to publicly thank Anna Łabieniec and Bogdan Paszkiewicz from SUNY Project Publishers for helping me and also edging me on to get this done and produced. And I also want to thank Waldemar Kontewicz and Anna Łabieniec, who translated the English poems into Polish. So now we have Polish poems, English poems. And the history of this whole story that I just told you was also translated into Polish by Waldemar Kontewicz, who was just here a few days ago. And I also have to thank another guy, Jurka Kowalczyka, który stoi obok mnie, who's the chief curator at the Orliński Museum and Archives of the Polish Armed Forces, where I also volunteer. But it's support, mutual support for the 2 of us, and we have Eric back there and John over there, who all work around the Orlinsky Museum and support one another in pursuing historical research. And because of that, we have, everybody needs somebody sort of get on with it, you know, get it done. George is my get it done guy, you know, he'll convince me that it's worth doing, and for that I'm very grateful. And so those people, yeah. And so finally, I have to thank still the Canadian Polish Research Institute for putting this evening on. It's sponsored by them, and I'm a member of them too, so I'm glad to be here. And it's good that they're doing the work they do, because they also help to preserve this history, which is, we need to do more of it. We need to get more of it out there into the general population. And finally, I want to thank the Consulate General of the Republic of Poland for hosting us here tonight and making this possible. Now, I know everybody's tired. You think you're tired. You should wear one of these wool coats for an hour. I don't know how long I've been yakking, but these are hot. I was a couple of times thinking, I got to get rid of this thing. I've been this hot all week. Anyway, żeby zakończyć, chcę chociaż kilka wierszyków przeczytać. The hard part is that I never know which wierszyk to read. So I'm going to read my favorite. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to read the same wiersz in Polish and then in English. And this happens to be my favorite one out of this, so that makes it easy if I can find it. And I'd be curious to know what the reaction is. There's one, I happen to believe that Polish is a more poetic language than English. And my home language, my base language is English. But when I read poetry in Polish, it somehow grabs me more than when I read similar poetry in English. And I just think it's a more poetic language for some reason. This poem is called Nomadzi, mainly because the Polish soldiers that came to Canada were nomads. They were basically traveling from country to country. They had to fight wherever they went, but in a way they had no country of their own. They ended up in Canada, and so this is called Nomadzi. Okay, I'll get too dry. Wędrowali po ziemi przez wiele lat, po lądach i morzach, zimnych i gorących, wśród wielu narodów, nieproszeni goście. Wieczorami, nucąc swojskie melodie, polonezy, mazurki, oberki, przenosili się do utęsknionego domu. Melancholia pochyliła im głowę lub radowali się wieczornymi tańcami, aż w końcu doczekali mazurka Dąbrowskiego. Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła i cały obóz stał jak jeden mąż i śpiewał. I think that's fantastic. My own opinion. Now listen to it in English and see what you think, if I can find it. Nomads. Wandering the earth over the many years on land and sea, cold and hot, among many peoples, as uninvited guests, but in the evenings, those songs of home, polonez, mazurka, oberek, brought them sadly, happily home, as they hung their heads in melancholy, or enjoyed the evening of dance. But in the end, they heard the triumphant march, Dąbrowski's mazurka, Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, and the whole camp stood as one and sang. Okay, those in favor of English? No. Did anybody seriously notice any difference in terms of movement in this, or is it just me? Because I read them in Polish, I just get...
Polish is better.
Much better?
We're moving here,
Okay.
Ale przy okazji gratulujemy wspaniałej polszczyzny u pana. Pan jest...
Ale widzisz, jak mój język się kręci?
Bez wódki.
Bez wódki. Ja, jak ojciec mówił, ojciec jako żołnierz i polityk zawsze mówił, bez wódki nic nie zrozumiesz i też na pewno jest. Nie wiem, czy przeczytać jeszcze jedno i potem koniec. Który? Okej. Ten jest naumyślnie wsadzony, żeby wszystkich zdenerwować. Anna łabieniec nie chciała nawet, żeby było w tym. Musieliśmy trochę złagodzić. I dlatego mam wielką przyjemność w czytaniu. Spróbujemy może ten po angielsku i po polsku też i to będzie pomysł. I am a Pole, and not many poems come with a warning. This poem comes with a warning that Anna felt was essential. Be careful, could be a dangerous poem. Warning, this poem could be upsetting to some, and that is the actual intention of the poet. All resemblances to real people and events is purely coincidental. I didn't want to put that in there, but Anna said, you've got to put that in there or you're going to get people all annoyed. And then it's annoying Poles are almost all annoyed all the time anyway. Here goes. And I'll try this one in Polish, and that'll be it. This one's a little more complicated, I think. And this is very personal. I'll add to it. I'm a Pole without a Poland. Now there is a fate on which to meditate. By a man of a full land, a forlorn destiny to perpetuate. Passionate and tragic. I have that very uncomfortable feeling of being double parked in an ahistorical Canada, or worse, in Polish half-being. Damn Poles, endlessly argumentative, born to disagree. Often I have had enough of you. What can I have in common with you? We have no puns here and now. Is that necessarily good or bad? A pun whose tradition and code have been trampled by the rash rush for modern life and the all-out stamping out by Stalinist regimes in the East and West, ridiculous hats, dances that could be featured in stomp, impossible language, unsuitable names, quick to anger and to cry, romantic and delusional. Why are Poles never number one? Ever since you stopped being Polish, you love everything Polish. Unlike true Poles who love only the Polishness within, but can't agree about, the list is too long to be specific, why are there no Polish pickled cucumbers in my poems? I don't know, but I'm working on it. I am a Pole without a poem, but over time you leave that space, gone and forgotten, become a Canadian, vanished, no traces, no roots. And so I hunkered down to write some more poetry, to preserve that which I am not. I spróbujemy ten po polsku. Nie wiem, czy tłumacze byli dokładnie tłumaczyli to, co ja napisałem. Czasami im się nie podoba. Okej, też ma uwagę. Jestem Polakiem, to mój tytuł. Uwaga, to jest ich. Ten wiersz może być przykry dla niektórych i taka właśnie jest intencja poety. Wszelkie podobieństwa do osób i wydarzeń prawdziwych jest niezamierzone i przypadkowe. Okay. Jestem Polakiem bez Polski. Nad takim losem trzeba się zastanowić. Człowiek z nieistniejącego kraju i beznadziejnym przeznaczeniem przetrwania, namiętnym i tragicznym. To bardzo nieprzyjemne uczucie, aby gdy zajmuje podwójne miejsce na parkingu w ahistorycznej Kanadzie, albo co gorsze, na półistniejącej polskości. Cholerni Polacy, bez końca kłótliwi, urodzeni do niezgody, jak ja mam wam czasem dość. Co mogę mieć z wami wspólnego? Nie mamy panów tu i teraz. Czy to musi być dobre lub złe? Pan, którego szlachetne tradycje i zasady zostały rozjechane przez pośpiech ówczesnego przez stalinowskie reżimy na wschodzie i na zachodzie. Śmiesznie nakrycie głowy, tańce, które nadawałyby się na pokazy stąd, niewymienny język, niemożliwe nazwiska, łatwo wpadający w gniew i rujący łzy, romantyczny i marzycielski. Dlaczego Polacy nie są nigdy numerem jeden? Odkąd przestałeś być Polakiem, kochasz wszystko, co polskie. W przeciwieństwie do prawdziwych Polaków, którzy kochają tylko polsko w sobie, którzy nie potrafią się zgodzić na ta lista jest zbyt długa, by ją rozwijać. Dlaczego w moich wierszach nie ma polskich ogórków kiszonych? Nie wiem, ale pracuję nad tym. Jestem Polakiem bez Polski. Jednak z czasem uwalniam się od tego miejsca, nieobecny i zapomniany. Zostałem Kanadyjczykiem, zniknąłem bez śladów, bez korzeni. I tak przycupnąłem, aby napisać trochę więcej wierszy, aby zachować to, czym nie jestem. Chyba powinien skończyć na trochę weselszym tonie. Dziękuję bardzo. Zapomniałem jedno. Jeszcze 1 minutę, proszę. Bo mam tą nową książkę, bardzo ciekawą, na ten sam temat. Dobra, bo z jednej strony po polsku, z drugiej strony po angielsku. Mniej więcej to samo jest i po angielsku, i po polsku. Ale przy okazji, żeby podziękować, chcę najpierw dać konsulowi Andrzeju Skrzydło kopię z podziękowania, że nas tu przyjął i że jesteśmy razem. I teraz prezes Canadian Polish Research Institute, Joanna Lustański, proszę przyjść w imieniu Instytutu Bez poparcia Wawelwila to wiele rzeczy, co my tu robimy, nie byłoby możliwe. To proszę 2, to znaczy Eric Szustak i John Grayson albo Jan Gryguć, aby przyszedł do przodu, aby obydwaj przyszli do przodu. I Wawelwila nam, i muzeum tam wiele nam popiera i pomaga i chcemy im też podziękować, bo bez nich nie było tego muzeum. A ostatnio to muszę podarować generałowi tu, bo bez Jurka Kowalczyka by nie było tego muzeum, nie byłoby naszych kuratorów, którzy teraz współpracujemy i potrzebujemy takiego generała, który decyduje, co mamy robić następnie i jak to robić i pomagać nam w tym wszystkim. I nie tylko to, ale to jest teraz mój osobisty przyjaciel, że współpracujemy często i jestem bardzo szczęśliwy, że mam takiego kolegę i generała. Jurku, dziękuję. I na teraz możemy skończyć. Dziękuję już za gorąco.